Welcome back to the Linux Academy Nginx Deep Dive. In this lesson, we're going to go through and look at how we can use rewrite rules with Nginx. And rewrite rules allow us to modify the URL as it's coming in. We can either modify it and then redirect so that the URL you end up on matches what we want it to be, or we can modify the URL before passing it into our location blocks so that it can be handled. In this video, we're going to go and remove the HTML aspect of things from the end of our URL. So we're going to try to remove the file types from what we've got and still have the same content be rendered out to us. This is a fairly common thing. These are kind of vanity URLs. They look a little bit better if you don't have to have the .html on the end. And it also provides a way for you to kind of hide your infrastructure also. So if you're using something like PHP, if you really wanted to, you could remove the .php from things and you could still render out a PHP page. We're going to get started the same way we have been, and that's by looking in the documentation. And a good rule of thumb is that if you know kind of what you want to do in the domain language of web servers, then you can just kind of search for it. Like we searched for SSL and we found the SSL module. And if we search for rewrite, there will be various things in here about rewrites. So we're going to look at the HTTP rewrite module. And it's another not huge module. So it's a relatively small module that gives us a few things that we need. Specifically, we're going to utilize the rewrite, and then later on we'll use the return also. But the way that a rewrite rule works is that it goes into a server or location block, and it takes a regular expression. And if you're not familiar with regular expressions, there's a lot you can actually talk about there. You can do a lot with regular expressions. It's a way to kind of define a pattern. And then in certain situations, you can take pieces out of that pattern and use them in a replacement. So that's what we're going to be doing here. I can't fully explain regular expressions to you, but I can go through what exactly is happening in the regular expression that we're going to use. So we look for a pattern. If it matches, we create a replacement, and then there's an optional flag that we can work with. And our 4 flag values are permanent, redirect, break, and last. You can chain rewrite rules together, and the last option will prevent you from going to the next one. So if something matches a rewrite rule that's in the middle of 4 or 5 different rewrite declarations, then the last one, if it is matched, will skip the ones that are underneath it, and it'll go on and look for a location block. Break works similarly, but it works with the semantics of the break directive. But the two that we're going to focus on right now are going to be redirect, which actually causes you to redirect using a 302 status code, and then permanent, which does the exact same thing as redirect, except for it's a 301 status code. And we'll discuss what the difference is with this when we get to it. We're going to put our rewrite rules inside of our default server block, and then we're going to change our locations to work off of what the new URLs are. So let's get started with that now. I'm logged in as root, as you should probably be, or you're going to have to use sudo to modify this, but we're going to go back into modifying the conf.d default.conf file. So to get started, let's write our rewrite rules right after our SSL certificates here, and that's going to be rewrite. And then we have a regular expression. It doesn't go in any sort of quotes or anything like that, but we're going to say from the beginning of the URI, which this is everything after the domain. We want everything from the beginning, and then parentheses indicate that we're using a capture group, so we can put a pattern in here, and then we can utilize the contents of this capture group in our replacement later on, but we want this capture group to include a slash, and then a dot is a wildcard character, so this can be any character after a slash, and then the asterisk means 0 or more of the preceding character. So in this case, we say we want everything that matches starting with a slash and can be any characters long after that. And then as we continue on with this, we're going to have a literal period, which means we have to escape it using a / with HTML. And then we're going to put another capture group here that includes a literal question mark, because a question mark is another special character in regular expressions that we'll see the real use of here in a second. And then another period asterisk, which means any characters after this point. So we'll close that capture group. Now we have 2 capture groups. And then we want to say that the second capture group is optional, and that's what the question mark is going to allow us to do. It's going to say whatever was right before this, so that can either be a single character or it can be something like an entire capture group like we have right here. We can say that that is either going to be there or it's not, but if it's not there, we're still going to match this pattern. And then to indicate that this would take up the entire URI, so from beginning to end, the opposite of the caret at the beginning is going to be a $sign at the end. So to kind of demonstrate this, what this would turn into is if we had a URI that was admin.html, and then there was a question mark for a query string and said something like debug equals true, then our first capture group is going to return us admin, and then our second capture group is going to return to us debug equals true. It's just basically cutting out the HTML in the middle. And that's exactly what this regular expression does. And it will match basically anything that has a .html in it. So with that in mind, our replacement is going to be the first capture group, which we can reference using $1. And then the second group can be $2. And if you had more capture groups than just that, you could use $3, $4, and you could put other things in here as well. Lastly, we want our flag at the end here, and we're going to have this redirect, and we're going to use redirect, which is the 302 version, to say that we're going to point you in a different direction, but this isn't permanent. We're not saying that you should always do this without consulting us. And that's what a 301 does. A lot of browsers will take the result of a 301, so if it's redirected with a permanent redirect, if you try to go to the URL that was permanently redirected, your browser won't actually consult the server before it changes the URL for you. It will know that it needs to redirect this somewhere else, and it will go off and do that. So it's good to use partial redirects unless you know a very specific URL is never going to be modified again, and then you can use a permanent redirect. So this one rewrite rule will allow us to take in a request, remove the HTML, but then since it redirects, we're actually making another request to ourselves at that point, and then it's going to be processed again. Whoops. We are going to have a second rewrite rule that is going to start similarly with a caret and a capture group. This one's going to be a little bit different. We're not going to capture the slash at the beginning, but we're going to say if there's any group of characters as our capture group, and then it ends with a slash right at the end of the URI, then we actually want to rewrite this so that it's just the initial portion without the trailing slash. And then we'll also redirect this. And this just prevents somebody from going to example.com/admin. If they do that, then it's just going to send them to /admin, and we'll handle that. Let's quit out of this file and go and make sure that we have configured everything properly. Whoops, nginx-t. Looks like we don't have any obvious errors. Now we can do systemctl reload nginx. And if we go over to our server and we refresh, we can see that it's taking a little bit longer and that the page isn't redirecting properly. And that's because it's redirecting forever. It's going to just continue to redirect. And what did we actually do to cause that? Let's take a look at our default.conf again and see what would be different. So we were going to the root of our server, and then we were removing the HTML from it and returning back. And we don't have any location block that would tell it how to find the actual HTML file for it. So we're running into the situation where it thinks it needs to use a 404, so it's going down to the error page 404, but the error page 404 is pointing it at 404.html, which it doesn't know how to find anymore. So this is where we get into the issue where we want to display content that does not match exactly what is requested in the URL, and for that we're going to have to use another portion of the Nginx standard library of directives. We're going to go back to the main documentation, and then we want to once again go into the core module. And inside of here, we're going to look for one called try files. And what try files will allow us to do is to take a URI and then look for a file on disk, and then we can serve the content of that without changing the URI. And specifically what we want to do is we want to take any location after our slash, and we want to start looking for HTML files that we can render out for that. So what this will give us is something where we check the URI, and this is after all the rewrites have happened. So we have this cleaned up to where it no longer has HTML in it. So if it was somebody was going to admin.html, now they're just going to admin. And so there is no just admin file for us right now. So what it does is it takes a list of files and then eventually returns something at the end. So this URI can be a default piece of content that you know is always going to exist, or you can have it be a status code, at which point it'll go and be handled by your error code logic. So if we just kind of walk through what we want this to do, it's going to be something like admin, that it can't find that. So it's going to look for a directory called admin with an index.html inside. If it can't find that, then this person is setting up to where it's going to look for an admin.html file. If it can find this, it will render the content from this file for the given request. And if it can't find it with any of these files on disk, then it's going to return a 404. So we actually want pretty close to this exact declaration, and then we're going to need to modify our special location block that we're using for our admin.html and our error file declarations. So let's give this a shot. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a new location that is for /, and this kind of happens by default for us when we just set the root. It just knows to look for files within our root. But now we're saying that if it starts with a /, then you should fall into this block unless there's a more specific location directive that would match better. So from here, we're going to say try files, and then we want to try the URI index.html if there is one. So this is in the event that it's a directory that is underneath our HTML directory. We want to render the index.html file. If that doesn't exist, then we're going to do uri.html. If there is a directory by that name, but it doesn't contain an index.html, then we want to render the directory itself. And then lastly, we're just going to try to render the URI itself if there is specifically one that exists. And then if none of those things works, then we're going to return a 404. We're going to take this entire line, we're going to copy it, we're going to move it down into our admin area also, and then we're going to remove the .html from here, because there's never going to be a situation where the .html is still there since it's being removed from our rewrite rules. And in this particular situation, we want to say everything underneath the admin should be requiring login. And this would actually allow us to go from having an admin.html specifically to we can have a whole group of files underneath an admin directory potentially that would all require login. So this is kind of an improvement in expanding the admin area of our default site. And for now, let's just go with that right there and see if this, specifically this location / section, fixes our infinite redirects that we had. We'll test our configuration, and then we'll restart the server. Now, if we come back over and refresh the page, you'll see that going to /404 worked out just fine. If we go to the root, we're seeing the content that we expect. And then if we go to admin.html, it's going to require our password. And then you'll see that it stripped off the .html at the end here. So in this video, we looked at how you can conditionally render content that doesn't exactly match what is being requested, and how you can change the URL that you are initially receiving to match something that you want to pattern match against later on using rewrite rules.